Good afternoon, and Steve here, and I wanted to see if I could get this video made and uploaded so that people might be able to watch it or listen to it as kind of a bedtime story. Because this whole world right now seems to be somewhat of a story. So I'll be reading once again from the book Attuned by Thomas Hübl. And the last, I think, 3 videos called Attuned were the introduction to the book. And so this is part 1. And I think that there's 3 parts, but I'm not going to look. There may be more. So in part 1 of this book, we will explore the mystical principles behind human development and human connection. How each soul embodies and grows through the expression of the will and with the support of present and attuned caregivers and loved ones. This growth is led ever forward by the universal drives of being and becoming, autonomy and belonging. And there may be some voices, there may be some sounds of kitty bathing going on behind the computer. So sometimes she's kind of vociferous, I think is the word. Noisy is another way of saying it. Okay. So this growth is led ever forward by the universal drives of being and becoming, autonomy and belonging, the ballast in the sail which offers both stability and direction. At the center of these is the fulcrum of relationship. Nearly everything in the human story depends on the quality of our connections to one another. So in a book about attunement, connection, and awakened interdependence, we must necessarily confront the sand in the engine, the inhibitory effects of unwitnessed, unhealed trauma on development and its fracturing impact on our capacity to relate with self and others. Yet, as they say, the medicine is in the wound. Though trauma disrupts the act of relation, conscious attunement can help us create internal and external coherence. Consciously regulate the nerve system, and he calls it the nervous system. And I made a decision at a certain point that calling it the nervous system had a tendency to relate the neurological system to nervousness. And so I made a decision years ago, 20, 30 years ago, to call it the nerve system. So when I see that he's written the nervous system, I'm going to be saying nerve system. So it's a little bit different, but it's not. So it's different to me. But whether I say nervous system or nerve system, you see if it's different to you. But I'm going to be saying nerve system every time he wrote nervous system. and you can write in the comments section if you think that's wrong for me to do. I might continue to do it because I've always been that person that was like, well, I want to just find out how it goes this way. Okay. Consciously regulate the nervous system, process toxic stress, and feel more embodied and more connected with others. Attunement practices are healing tools for dealing with the effects of trauma, whether in people or across communities, and transparent communication is one such practice. So this is a section. So this is part 1, and here in part 1 is 1. So, I'm just reading the book as I go along, so I'm not reading it ahead of time. So, part 1, chapter 1. Ancient Principles, Evolutionary Insights. So here's something that was written by Andre Linde. The universe and the observer exist as a pair. I cannot imagine a consistent theory of the universe that ignores consciousness. And from Thomas More, care of the soul begins with observance of how the soul manifests itself and how it operates. Famed physicist John Wheeler once said, "No phenomenon is a real phenomenon unless it is an observed phenomenon." He wasn't being cheeky. He meant it literally. Wheeler's strange observation was not immediately greeted with universal applause, of course. Truly radical ideas are often difficult to grok, and one prevailing order takes time to give way to the next. In classical physics, objects exist. Planets, asteroids, and molecules have established properties and discernible characteristics, and they generally do as expected. If a classical tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, the tree doesn't care. It produces a riot of sound waves when it hits the ground. But in the strange world of quantum mechanics, our tree is a subatomic particle, and paradoxically, a particle is a wave, is a particle. The particle wave exists everywhere and nowhere at once, so to speak, as a probabilistic phenomenon. Stranger still, a quantum tree only pops into existence as a discrete entity with discernible characteristics, a location, and behavior when there is someone to observe its efforts, i.e., it does not even show up in the forest until someone is present to hear it fall. According to the new quantum story as described by John Wheeler, consciousness is required for anything much to happen at all. Strange indeed. The farther we peer into space, writes scientist Robert Lanza, the more we realize that the nature of the universe cannot be understood fully by inspecting spiral galaxies or watching distant supernovas. It lies deeper. It involves our very selves. After the Enlightenment got going, i.e., somewhere between the lifetimes of René Descartes and Werner Heisenberg, physicists and most otherwise rational people accepted what has become the prevailing belief, namely that ours is an objective universe, material and insensate, existing out there. Somehow experts surmised the great big physical cosmos banged into existence and lumbered along more or less steadily for billions of years before anything like the trilobite or triceratops or wolf or human called it home. This is the general cosmological story that is now largely taken for granted. In 5 vastly abridged steps, that story goes more or less like so. 1. First, by some unknowable accident, stuff showed up, such as stars and gases and rocks and minerals and mountains. We have a little troublemaker here, so we'll see how this goes. Want to go into the closet? 2. Much later, and likewise inexplicably, life appeared. Initially, life was terribly simple, though nonetheless strange, given the otherwise inanimate order of things. By and by, life inadvertently complexified by way of many random mutations. It learned to consume sunlight and laid down a green carpet across the planet, mosses, ferns, flowers, trees, etc. 4. Still later, after life had accomplished a lot more mutating, it managed to grow profoundly more complex, a la the nervous system, vertebra, feathers, fur, and so on. And whether simple or complex, life's overriding objective was to survive long enough to successfully reproduce and thereby propagate its genes for posterity. 5. All this continued apace until life complexified again and boom, was suddenly walking around on 2 legs, playing with fire, planting crops, waging war, building city-states, and inflicting upon itself intricate religious practices, again for posterity. Before you knew it, life had circumnavigated the globe, laid down rail lines and highways, sent probes into outer space, and devised, directed, and surfed the internet. Even now, life is busy cooking up recipes for artificial life. It is, of course, impossible to capture this incredible cosmology in so few words. Suffice it to say that just as humankind began to understand the material universe, the world of bodies and planets and bowling balls, and its sweeping evolutionary processes, another radical recognition about the nature of pretty much everything began to dawn. Every epoch has its Copernicus, its Galileo, someone rascally enough to pick up the book, "This is what we know absolutely to be true," and pitch it directly in the nearest bonfire, or at the very least commence the writing of a bold new chapter. So it was in 1927 when 2 American physicists, Clinton Davison and Lester Germer, shook the prevailing scientific paradigm. With their now famous double-slit experiment, Davison and Germer provably demonstrated the importance of an observer, or if you will, consciousness. On the state of things. Their experiment repeatedly demonstrated that whenever someone pays attention as a subatomic particle or a quantum of light is fired in the direction of 2 parallel slits, the particle does precisely what you would expect. It appears to pass through one slit or the other and hits the surface or wall behind, just like an ordinary bullet or a baseball. But if no one is watching, as the particle is fired, it behaves like a wave, representing all probabilities and mysteriously passing through both slits at once. By the late 20th century, another paradigm rattler, who worked at the University of Geneva, flipped the story still further, forever upending what we collectively call reality. In 1997, it was a very good year, physicist Nicholas Guessin successfully pulled off a radical experiment, proving a theory not even Einstein had been able to wrap his head around. In his experiment, Guessin was able to separate 2 entangled photons, light particles, by a distance of 7 miles, sending each in the opposite direction along an optical fiber. When one of the pair of photons hit a 2-way mirror, particle detectors recorded whether it randomly went through the mirror or bounced off. The world-shattering part, whichever action the proton took, its entangled twin simultaneously made the precise complementary action 7 miles away. Spookily, it was as if these entangled photons had instantaneously communicated with one another from a distance. Now, it is not necessarily true that a message traveled from here to there faster than the speed of light. It's more that Newtonian spatial separation, conditions in the macro realm, does not appear to impede quantum relationality, conditions in the micro realm. In the years since, Gissen's experiment has been successfully replicated, proving one of the weirder theories to emerge out of quantum mechanics. Its central revelation, whether entangled particles are separated by 7 miles or the length of multiple galaxies, they are never truly separate. In fact, Gissen and others now believe that quantum communication occurring in entanglement may also be present in objects at the macroscopic scale, potentially even those visible to the naked eye. Nature and consciousness are correlative, interdependent, relational, and the observer is fundamentally entangled with the universe it witnesses. In the quantum era, we are collectively arriving at an altogether strange realization, though one that Gautama Buddha surmised some 2,400 years ago. So much about the nature of reality depends upon consciousness. Nature and consciousness are correlative, interdependent, relational, and the observer is fundamentally entangled with the universe it witnesses. It stands to reason, then, that if we have any hope of building a better world, we should turn our attention to the essence of the observer and take a look at consciousness itself. What follows is an explanation into the mystical principles undergirding the arresting insights of quantum science, principles that have been with us for millennia. Okay, that's enough for tonight. Hope it helps you to sleep well, and as always, namaste.